Today I saw something I should have never seen. My own son, Caleb, the man I raised with so much love, rummaging through my documents like a thief in my own house. And the worst part is, he doesn't know I saw him. He doesn't know that the security camera I had repaired is now working perfectly. It all started 3 days ago, when I called a technician to fix the surveillance system. It had been broken for weeks, and I was feeling vulnerable. A 68-year-old woman, living alone after Caleb had insisted so strongly that he and Chloe move in with me to take better care of me. What a bitter irony. I completely forgot to mention to them that I had hired someone for the repair. I was so used to them controlling every aspect of my life that it simply slipped my mind. But thank God I forgot, because otherwise I would have discovered the truth far too late. This morning, after Caleb supposedly left to look for a job and Chloe went to the grocery store, I decided to check if the cameras were working from my phone. The app the technician had installed allowed me to see the whole house in real time. At first, I thought about testing it later, but something urged me to do it immediately. I tapped the screen, and there they were, crystal clear images of my living room. My heart stopped. Caleb and Chloe hadn't gone anywhere. They were there, in my living room, with all my documents spread out on the coffee table as if it were their personal office. Caleb was holding my folder of important documents, the one I always kept locked in my bedroom desk. Chloe held papers up, examining them one by one in the light from the window. They moved with the familiarity of people who had done this before. "Where's the original deed?" I heard Chloe's voice through the camera's audio. Her tone was cold. "Calculating. Mr. Evans told us he specifically needs the original document to make the forgery believable." Mr. Evans. That name sent a chill down my spine. He was a lawyer Caleb had met at some dive bar, a shady-looking man who had always given me a bad feeling. Now I understood why. "It has to be here," Caleb replied, his voice thick with frustration. "Mom is meticulous about these things. She keeps everything. Meticulous." That word came from his lips as if it were a curse. The very order and care he had always praised in me, he was now using against me. Chloe moved closer to the window, examining a document against the light. "Look at this, Caleb. It says here the house is worth over $150,000, according to the last appraisal. Mr. Evans was right. It's worth all this effort. $150,000. The house I bought with the sweat of 30 years of work as a nurse. The house where I raised Caleb after his biological father abandoned us when he was just 5 years old. The house I thought I would leave to him as an inheritance, not as loot for him to steal from me while I was still alive. Once we have the deed in our name," Chloe continued, "we can sell and move her into something smaller. A 1-bedroom apartment will be enough for her final years." Her final years. They spoke of me as if I were already dead, as if I were an obstacle to be removed from the path to their prosperity. Caleb walked toward my bedroom. I watched him through another camera as he opened drawer after drawer, searching desperately. "She has to have a safe deposit box or something." She was always paranoid about important documents. Paranoid. Another word that was once about protection now became a flaw. He returned to the living room empty-handed, his face red with frustration. Chloe was waiting for him with her arms crossed, clearly annoyed by the delay. "Mr. Evans only gave us until Friday to get the original deed," she told him. "Without it, he can't do the job. And without the job, we'll keep living off the crumbs your mother gives us." Crumbs. She called the $300 a month I gave them for their personal expenses crumbs. Money I took from my modest Social Security check to keep the peace at home. Money that was apparently not enough for their ambition. "We'll pressure her more," Caleb said, slumping onto my favorite sofa. "We'll tell her it's medical insurance papers, something urgent she needs to sign. She's so confused lately, she won't even read what she's signing." Confused? Me. It was true that sometimes it took me longer to remember names or dates, something completely normal for my age. But they had been cultivating that narrative, making me doubt my own mental clarity every time I questioned their decisions. "What if she suspects something?" Chloe asked. Caleb shrugged with an indifference that broke my soul. "What's she going to do? Call the police on her own son? Besides, once we sign the papers with Mr. Evans, it'll be too late to reverse the process. Chloe smiled for the first time in the entire conversation. It was a cruel, satisfied smile. Perfect. So tomorrow, we'll bring her the forged documents from Mr. Evans and tell her it's to update her will. She'll sign without asking any questions. They got up to put my documents away, but not as they had found them. They arranged them carelessly, without the order I always maintained. It was as if they weren't even trying to hide that they had been snooping through my things. Before leaving the living room, Caleb stopped and looked directly toward where the camera was installed. For a moment, I thought he'd discovered me, that he knew I was watching, but he just stood there, thoughtful. "I wish we didn't have to do this," he muttered, more to himself than to Chloe. "Are you having second thoughts?" she asked him, her tone a mix of surprise and annoyance. "No, but—" Caleb sighed deeply. "She's my mother, Chloe, the woman who raised me alone, who worked double shifts to give me everything I needed." For a split second, a microscopic spark of hope ignited in my chest. Maybe there was something left of the little boy who used to hug me when he had nightmares. Maybe there was still salvation for us. But Chloe walked over to him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Caleb, honey, think about our future. Think about the children we want to have. Are we going to depend forever on an old woman who gets more senile every day? This house is our chance to be independent, to build something of our own." And just like that, with those poisonous words, the last vestige of my good son disappeared. I watched as his expression hardened again, as greed once more took hold of his features. "You're right," he said finally. "It's time to think about us." They left the living room, and I remained there, sitting in the kitchen, watching my phone screen as if it were a horror movie. But it wasn't fiction. It was my real life, crumbling before my eyes. For 35 years, I built that man. I fed him, clothed him, educated him, comforted him in his failures, and celebrated his triumphs. I worked myself to exhaustion to pay for his college. I gave up on finding love again to focus on him. And now, my greatest creation had become my greatest betrayal. But there was something Caleb and Chloe didn't know, something that would turn them from hunters into prey without them even realizing it. I had all their conversations recorded. I had the evidence of their criminal conspiracy. And for the first time in months, I had the power to decide my own destiny. The war was just beginning, and they didn't even know they had already lost. For the next 3 days, I lived a double life I never imagined possible. On one hand, I was the same old Eleanor, the loving mother who made breakfast, asked about their plans, and smiled when Caleb kissed my forehead before leaving. On the other hand, I was an undercover detective in my own home, documenting every move, every conversation, every piece of proof of the greatest betrayal of my life. Technology had become my secret ally. The app the technician installed on my phone allowed me to access the cameras 24 hours a day. I could see the living room, the kitchen, the main hallway, even part of the room that Caleb and Chloe had turned into their private sanctuary. On Tuesday morning, I watched them plan their next steps. Chloe was sitting on my sofa, her laptop open and several papers scattered around her. Caleb paced back and forth, clearly nervous. "Mr. Evans says he has the documents ready," Chloe reported, reading something on the screen. "But he needs us to bring the original deed to make the final signature comparisons." "What if Mom notices it's missing?" Caleb asked, biting his nails. A habit he'd had since childhood that I had always tried to correct. Chloe looked up with that cold smile. I was beginning to know all too well. "Caleb, your mother is 68 years old. She hasn't looked at those documents in months. Besides, we can just borrow it for a few hours and put it back before she even notices. Borrow it." They talked about stealing the deed to my house as if it were a library book. But what if? Caleb stopped mid-sentence and glanced toward the kitchen, where I was supposedly making lunch. "If what?" Chloe insisted. "What if she suspects something? I've noticed she's been more attentive lately, like she's watching us." My heart raced. Had I been that obvious? Had they found me out? Chloe laughed dismissively. "Caleb, please. Your mother spends most of her day watching her soap operas and talking to herself. If she were that attentive, she would have noticed you've been lying about looking for a job for 2 weeks. 2 weeks. So he wasn't even looking for work, as he had told me. It was all part of their act to keep me calm while they executed their plan. You're right, Caleb admitted, though his voice still sounded unsure. It's just, I don't know. I feel like she's judging me all the time. That's your guilt, Chloe retorted coldly. You still see that woman as your sainted mother instead of what she really island. An obstacle to our future. An obstacle. That word echoed in my head like a funeral bell. To the woman my son had chosen as his life partner. I was not a person. I was simply something to be removed from the path. Besides, Chloe continued, snapping her laptop shut, once we have the house, we can look for a decent nursing home for her. Something affordable but comfortable. With the $150,000 from the sale, we can invest in our own business and still have enough left over to take care of her properly. A nursing home. The phrase hit me like a hammer to the chest. They wanted to sell my house and lock me away in an institution with the money from my own property. The cruelty of their plan was so refined it almost seemed professional. Caleb sat down next to her, and for the first time in days, he seemed to relax. You really think it will work? Mr. Evans has done this before, Chloe replied, stroking his hair as if he were a small child. He says he has a contact at the county records office who can expedite the property transfer. In 2 weeks, max, the house will be in our name. 2 weeks. They had everything timed with military precision. And the money? Caleb asked. Mr. Evans is charging $5,000 for the whole process. It's expensive, but consider that we're talking about a net profit of over $100,000. It's an investment worth making. $5,000. The price they had put on my trust, my home, my dignity as a mother. For the rest of the day, I acted with superhuman normalcy. I made their favorite meals. I asked about their plans. I even offered them extra money to go out to the movies. Every smile I forced onto my lips hurt me physically, but I needed time to process what I had discovered and plan my next move. That night, when they finally went to sleep, I sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea and my phone. I reviewed all the day's recordings, making mental notes of every important detail. I had complete conversations where they confessed their criminal plan. I had dates, names, specific amounts. I had enough evidence to destroy their lives if I wanted to, but something stopped me from calling the police immediately. Maybe it was the last shred of hope that Caleb would come to his senses. Maybe it was my need to fully understand just how far they were willing to go. Or maybe, deep in my heart, I needed a direct confrontation before taking irreversible steps. Wednesday dawned with a light rain that tapped against the windows like tears from the sky. Caleb and Chloe ate breakfast in silence, exchanging knowing glances that I pretended not to notice. There was a different tension in the air, as if something important was about to happen. Mom, Caleb said after finishing his coffee, we need to talk to you about something important. This was it, the moment they had been preparing for. Of course, sweetie, I replied, sitting across from them at the dining room table. What is it? Chloe cleared her throat and placed a folder I didn't recognize on the table. Eleanor, we've been thinking about your future, about your financial security. My financial security? I asked, genuinely confused by the direction of the conversation. Yes, Caleb chimed in, taking my hand with a false tenderness that now made me nauseous. We've been looking into wills, medical insurance, those kinds of important things that everyone your age should have in order. Chloe opened the folder and pulled out several official-looking documents. A lawyer friend of Caleb's helped us prepare some papers to update all your legal documentation. They're standard forms, nothing complicated. Mr. Evans. It had to be him who had prepared these fraudulent documents. What kind of documents? I asked, feigning the naivety they expected of me. Basically, it's to ensure that if anything happens to you, Caleb explained, both your will and the ownership of the house are legally in order. It also includes an authorization for us to manage your medical and financial affairs if one day you can't do it yourself. Authorization to manage my affairs. They wanted me to sign over complete power of my life to them. It's for your own good, Eleanor, Chloe added in a syrupy voice. Imagine if you had an accident or a serious illness. Without these papers, Caleb wouldn't be able to help you with anything legally. They pushed the documents toward me, and I could see they were filled with complicated legal terms. entire paragraphs in small print, designed to be difficult to read and understand. But I managed to make out key words: transfer, assignment of rights, irrevocable power. I don't really understand all of this, I said, holding the papers and feigning confusion. Could you explain it to me more slowly? I saw a flash of impatience cross Chloe's face, but Caleb maintained his compassionate smile. Mom, it's boring technical stuff, he said. The important thing is that you sign here, here, and here. He pointed to several lines marked with small X's. The lawyer says it's urgent because there are changes in the tax laws that could affect you if you don't update these documents before next month. Lies. It was all elaborate lies to pressure me into signing without reading. What if I want to read it all first? I asked. I'm a slow reader, but I like to understand what I'm signing. Chloe's mask of patience began to crack. Eleanor, it's over 20 pages of legal jargon. It would take you days to fully understand it, and like Caleb told you, it's urgent. Besides, Caleb added, we trust that the lawyer did everything correctly. He's a very respected professional. Respected. Mr. Evans, the man who, by their own words, had done these kinds of frauds before. Well, I said finally, placing the papers on the table. Let me think about it until tomorrow. It's a very important decision, and I want to be sure. The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Caleb and Chloe exchanged an alarmed look they tried to hide. Mom, Caleb said, his voice taking on a firmer tone. We really need you to sign today. The lawyer gave us an appointment for early tomorrow morning, and if we don't bring the signed documents, we'll lose our chance. What chance? I asked. Chloe leaned forward, her patience finally running out. The chance to protect you legally. Eleanor, don't you trust us? Don't you trust your own son? There it was. The emotional manipulation they had been saving as their final card, turning my caution into a matter of family trust. Of course I trust you, I lied, picking up the pen Caleb had placed next to the documents. I just wanted to be sure. I saw them relax immediately. Their faces lit up with a mixture of relief and anticipated victory. They thought they had won. I held the pen over the first signature line and stopped. You know what? I'm going to call my doctor first, to ask if this could affect my health insurance. Mom! Caleb exploded, completely losing his composure for the first time. You don't need to call anyone. Just sign the damn papers. The shout echoed through the house like a gunshot. In that moment, I knew I had pushed too far. I could no longer keep pretending. The war had officially begun. Caleb's shout was still ringing in my ears when I saw his real face for the first time in years. The mask of the loving son was gone. There were no fake smiles or sweet words. There was only a desperate man, furious that his victim was resisting being devoured. Caleb, I whispered, letting the pen drop onto the table. Why are you yelling at me? He realized his mistake immediately. I watched him try to reconstruct his facade, struggling to regain control of the situation, but it was too late. The beast had shown its fangs. I'm sorry, Mom, he said, running his hands through his hair. It's just that I've been so stressed lately. The financial situation, the job search, it's all so overwhelming. Chloe put a hand on his arm, a gesture that looked calming but I knew was a silent warning to control his temper. What Caleb means to say, she intervened with a calm voice, is that these legal procedures are very stressful for everyone. That's why it's better to get this over with and not drag it out unnecessarily. Unnecessarily. As if my caution was a senile whim, and not the basic survival instinct of a woman who had just discovered her own family was betraying her. I understand you're stressed, I said, getting up from the table, but I'm not signing anything until I'm completely sure of what it means. I'm old, not an idiot. Those words came out of my mouth with more force than I had used in months. I saw them both freeze, surprised by my sudden firmness. No one's saying you're an idiot, Caleb muttered, but his tone had a dangerous edge. Then don't treat me like one, I retorted. These documents are staying here until I decide what to do with them. I took the papers from the table and put them in the first kitchen drawer I found. It was a symbolic gesture, of course, but I needed to show them I still had control over my own life. Caleb and Chloe remained at the dining table, talking in whispers I couldn't hear. I retreated to my room under the pretext of taking a nap, but I really wanted to review the recordings of the conversation I had just had. From the privacy of my room, with the door locked, I opened the app on my phone. There they were, still sitting in my dining room, but now they were speaking in low voices with agitated gestures. "This isn't going according to plan," Chloe was saying, clearly annoyed. She was supposed to sign without asking questions. "She's been more suspicious lately," Caleb replied. "Like she suspects something. You haven't told anyone about our plan, have you?" "Of course not. I'm not stupid." Chloe was thoughtful for a moment, drumming her fingers on the table. "We need to change our strategy. If she won't sign willingly, we'll have to pressure her another way." "What do you suggest?" "Your mother depends on us financially for a lot of things, right? The private medical services, the big shopping trips, the extra expenses." "Yeah, but her Social Security covers the basics." "Exactly, the basics." Chloe smiled maliciously. What would happen if suddenly those extra expenses disappeared? If she had to live solely on her pension? Caleb frowned, not fully understanding where the conversation was going. "Think about it," she continued. "Without our financial support, she'd have to cancel her private health insurance, rely solely on the public system. Without our car, she'd have to take public transport or expensive taxis. Without our help with the shopping, she'd have to carry heavy bags by herself." The perversity of their plan began to take shape before my eyes. They wanted to create an artificial crisis in my life to force me to depend completely on them. "That's brilliant," Caleb admitted, and the pride in his voice made me feel nauseous. "If we pressure her financially, she'll have no choice but to sign the documents to ensure our continued support." "Exactly. And if she resists, we simply tell her we can't afford to help her because we don't have stable jobs. That we need legal certainty about our shared future to justify that emotional and financial investment." Investment. They were talking about caring for his mother as if it were a business with an expected return on capital. "How long do you think she'll last?" Caleb asked. A 68-year-old woman, accustomed to a certain level of comfort, suddenly facing severe economic restrictions. Chloe shrugged. 2 weeks. Tops. 2 weeks. The same time frame they had mentioned before to complete the legal fraud. They got up from the table and headed toward their room. I heard them discussing the specific details of their economic pressure plan. They would cancel my supplemental health insurance that very day, deny me the use of the car for my medical appointments, and stop doing the grocery shopping that required heavy lifting. It was a plan of economic abuse designed to break my psychological resistance. And the most terrifying part was how well thought out it was. They knew exactly where my vulnerable points were and how to attack them methodically. That afternoon, while pretending to watch television in the living room, I observed them execute the first phase of their new strategy. Caleb called the health insurance company. "Yes, I want to cancel the supplemental policy for Eleanor Vega," I heard him say into the phone. "Effective immediately." "Correct. I'm her son, and I have legal authority for these matters." A lie. He had no legal authority over my affairs, but apparently the company didn't verify that information. Chloe, for her part, reviewed all the expenses they had been covering in recent months. She made a detailed list in her notebook. Specialized medications, transportation to medical appointments, grocery shopping, occasional cleaning services. "Tomorrow we start cutting all of this," she told Caleb when he returned from his phone call. "And when she asks us why, we tell her we're going through an economic crisis that prevents us from helping her like before. And what if she accepts living with fewer comforts?" "She won't," Chloe responded with absolute confidence. "I've watched your mother for months. She's a woman accustomed to a certain order, a certain quality of life. When she feels all of that is in danger, she'll sign whatever is necessary to regain stability." They were right about one thing. I was accustomed to a certain standard of living, but they were completely wrong to think I wasn't willing to sacrifice it to maintain my dignity and independence. That night, after they had gone to sleep, I sat in the kitchen to plan my own strategy. I had recordings of all their conspiracies, clear evidence of attempted fraud, and now also of economic abuse toward an elderly person, but I still wasn't ready to involve the authorities. There was something inside me, maybe the maternal part that still hoped for a miracle, that needed to give Caleb one last chance to reconsider. I wanted to confront him directly, show him I knew everything about their plans, and see if there was anything left of the son I had raised. I decided that the next day, I would put my own plan into motion. If they wanted to play with psychological pressure, I would teach them how someone with 68 years of life experience does it. But first, I needed to make sure all my evidence was backed up in multiple places. I copied all the videos and audio to a USB drive that I hid in a place they would never think to look. I also sent copies by email to an account I had created specifically for this purpose. If something happened to me, if they somehow managed to incapacitate me legally or physically, at least a complete record of their crimes would exist. Thursday dawned with a bright sun that contrasted brutally with the darkness that had settled in my home. Caleb and Chloe had breakfast as if nothing had happened, but I could feel the tension, waiting for the right moment to explode. "Good morning, Mom." Caleb greeted me with false cheerfulness. "Did you sleep well?" "Like a baby," I lied. In reality, I had spent most of the night awake, planning every detail of what was to come. "Perfect," said Chloe, "because today we need to talk to you about some changes in our financial situation." Here came their show. I sat at the breakfast table, feigning total innocence about what they were about to tell me. "What kind of changes?" I asked, pouring coffee into my favorite mug. Caleb exchanged a significant look with Chloe before continuing. "Well, Mom, as you know, I've been looking for a job without success for several weeks." Several weeks, another euphemism for I haven't worked honestly in months. "And unfortunately," Chloe added, "our savings are running out faster than expected." Our savings. They had no savings. They lived completely off my generosity, and we all knew it. "That means," Caleb continued with a grave expression, "that we'll have to make some temporary adjustments to the family expenses." "What kind of adjustments?" I asked, though I already knew the answer perfectly well. "Well, things like your supplemental health insurance, the use of the car for non-urgent appointments, some extra expenses we've been covering." Caleb paused dramatically. "They're temporary measures, of course, until we find a more permanent solution." "A more permanent solution?" They were referring to stealing my house. "I understand," I said simply, taking a sip of coffee. "And what would that permanent solution be?" Chloe leaned forward, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Well, Eleanor, if we signed those legal documents from yesterday, we could have the legal security necessary to make long-term investments in our family situation." "Long-term investments?" "Selling my house and putting me in a nursing home." "I see," I replied, staying perfectly calm. "So the documents from yesterday weren't just for my legal protection?" They froze. I had just shown that I understood perfectly the connection between their economic blackmail and the fraudulent papers. "Mom," Caleb began, "we just want what's best for everyone." "No," I interrupted, standing up from the table. "You want what's best for you, and you're willing to destroy your own mother to get it." The silence that followed was absolute. Finally, after days of acting, I had put all the cards on the table. The war was no longer secret. It was open, declared, and without quarter. The silence in the kitchen stretched like an oil slick. Caleb and Chloe stared at me with a mix of shock and calculation, as if they were completely re-evaluating their opponent. I was no longer the naive mother they had been manipulating. I was a woman who had discovered their game and was ready to confront them. "Mom," Caleb finally said, his voice laden with a false concern that I now found repulsive, "I think you're misinterpreting our intentions." "Really?" I replied, crossing my arms. "Then explain to me why your financial crisis coincides perfectly with your need for me to sign documents you won't let me read." Chloe intervened with that condescending smile she had perfected over months of manipulation. "Eleanor, I understand you might feel confused by all this complex legal information." "I'm not confused," I cut her off sharply. "I'm betrayed." The word landed on the table like a bomb. I watched Caleb physically flinch, as if he finally understood the magnitude of what he had been doing. "Betrayed," I repeated, savoring each syllable. "By the son I raised alone, whom I fed with my own labor, whom I educated by sacrificing my own comfort. The son who now wants to steal my house while I sleep." "I don't want to steal anything from you." Caleb exploded, slamming his fist on the table. "All I'm doing is thinking about our shared future." "Our future?" I laughed bitterly. "Caleb, Your plan includes putting me in a nursing home with the money from my own house. In what part of that plan am I included as family and not as an obstacle? Chloe and Caleb exchanged an alarmed glance. I had just proven I knew more than they had calculated. I don't know where you get these ideas, Chloe muttered, but her voice had lost all its previous confidence. Ideas, I said. I pulled my phone from my pocket and placed it on the table. Do you want me to remind you of your exact words? About finding something affordable but comfortable for my final years? The color drained completely from their faces. Caleb looked at the phone as if it were a poisonous snake. You were recording us, he whispered. No, I replied with deadly calm. You were recording yourselves. You forgot that the security camera I had repaired is working perfectly. And you forgot to tell me you were going to confess all your criminal plans in my own living room. Chloe shot up abruptly, knocking over her chair. How long have you been spying on us? Since Tuesday, I admitted without flinching. 3 full days of recordings where you confess your conspiracy to forge my signature, steal my house, and get rid of me. I have complete conversations about Mr. Evans, the $5,000 the fraud costs, your plans to sell the property. Caleb stood up too, but he looked more like a cornered animal than a threat. Mom, please, let me explain. Explain what? My voice rose for the first time in the conversation. That your wife sees me as an obstacle? That you've been lying about looking for a job while you plan to rob me? That you consider my life to be worth only the $150,000 you can get for my house? It's not like that, he shouted, but his eyes were filled with tears of desperation, not sincerity. Then tell me, Caleb. I stepped toward him until we were face to face. When Chloe said it was time to stop seeing me as your sainted mother and start seeing me as an obstacle, what was your answer? Silence. He knew he couldn't lie because I had the exact recording of that conversation. Your answer, I continued relentlessly, was, "You're right. It's time to think about us." Those were your exact words. Caleb, after 35 years of sacrificing for you, you decided it was time to sacrifice me for you. Caleb collapsed into his chair, covering his face with his hands. For a moment, I thought regret had finally arrived, the realization of what he had been doing. But Chloe hadn't given up. All right, she said, regaining some of her composure. Let's say you have those recordings. What are you going to do with them? The question caught me off guard, not because of its content, but because of its tone. There was no panic, no plea. There was a challenge. Excuse me? I asked. I'm asking what you plan to do, she repeated, crossing her arms. Because as far as I know, Caleb is still your son. Are you really going to destroy your own family over a house? The audacity of her response left me speechless for a moment. Even after being completely exposed, she was still trying to manipulate me. Destroy my family, I repeated slowly. Chloe, you two already destroyed this family. I'm simply defending myself. Defending yourself, she scoffed. A 68-year-old woman, alone, with no other family but us. What are you going to do, Eleanor? Call the police? Report your only son? There was something in her tone that put me on high alert. It wasn't just arrogance. It was confidence, as if she knew something I didn't. If necessary, I replied. Chloe smiled, and that smile was pure malice. And who's going to believe you? An elderly woman who lives alone, who by her own admission has been spying on her family, who has obvious issues with trust and paranoia. I have proof. You have illegally obtained recordings, she interrupted. Recordings made without our consent on a property where we have a legal right of residence. Any mediocre lawyer would have them thrown out in 5 minutes. My heart began to beat faster. Was that true? Had my recordings lost their legal value because of how I obtained them? Besides, Chloe continued, now circling the table like a predator, who is going to take a woman seriously who is clearly developing paranoid behaviors, spying on her own family, inventing conspiracies, socially isolating herself? I'm not socially isolating myself, I protested, but my voice sounded less sure. Aren't you? She stopped in front of me. When was the last time you spoke to a friend? When was the last time you left this house for anything that wasn't strictly necessary? Caleb has told me how you've been behaving lately. The mood swings, the distrust, the forgetfulness. Caleb lifted his head and, for the first time since the confrontation began, spoke with something resembling his old confidence. "It's true, Mom. I've been worried about you. That's why we wanted you to sign those documents, to ensure that if your mental health continues to deteriorate, we have the legal tools to help you." Deteriorating mental health. They were building an alternative narrative where I was the villain of the story, the paranoid old woman who had misinterpreted gestures of love as criminal conspiracies. "You know perfectly well there's nothing wrong with my mental health," I said, but I could feel doubt beginning to creep into my voice. "Really?" Chloe sat down again, now with the confidence of someone in control of the conversation. A woman who installs secret cameras to spy on her family, who invents elaborate theories about theft and conspiracies, who refuses to sign basic legal documents out of paranoia. "They're not theories," I shouted. "I heard you planning everything." "You heard us having normal conversations about your future and your safety," Caleb corrected. "Conversations that your paranoid mind interpreted as threats." It was brilliant, diabolically brilliant. They were turning the entire situation around, making my discovery of their betrayal into evidence of my supposed mental instability. "Mr. Evans," I said desperately. "You talked about Mr. Evans and the $5,000 to forge documents." "Mr. Evans is a real lawyer who is helping us with real legal procedures," Chloe replied without blinking. "The $5,000 are his fees for a complex job of updating documents. All completely legal." "And the nursing home? The talk of selling the house?" Caleb sighed, as if he were talking to a petulant child. "Mom, we talked about future options in case you ever need specialized care. It's something all responsible families consider." I felt as if the floor was opening up beneath my feet. Every piece of evidence I had, every conversation I had recorded, they were reinterpreting as proof of my own mental decline instead of their betrayal. But you said I was an obstacle," I murmured, feeling my confidence drain away. "We said your resistance to planning for your future was an obstacle to helping you properly." Chloe corrected with a patient tone, as if speaking to a psychiatric patient. "Mom," Caleb came over and put his hands on my shoulders. "We're worried about you. This behavior isn't normal. The paranoia, the accusations, spying on your own family. Maybe you need to talk to someone, a professional, a psychiatrist." They wanted to make me seem crazy to invalidate any resistance to their plans. But then I remembered something they couldn't reinterpret or manipulate. "If everything is so innocent," I said, regaining some of my strength, "then you'll have no problem showing those documents you want me to sign to an independent lawyer. Not Mr. Evans. Someone I choose." The silence that followed gave me all the answer I needed. Chloe and Caleb looked at each other, and in that look, I saw the panic they had been hiding under their new strategy of manipulation. "Of course," Chloe finally said, but her voice had lost all its previous confidence. "Whenever you want." But I knew it was a lie. And they knew that I knew it was a lie. The war had entered a new phase. It was no longer just about fraudulent documents or stolen houses. It was about my sanity, my credibility, my right to be believed. And that was a war I was not willing to lose. The next few days were the strangest of my life. Caleb and Chloe had completely changed their strategy, but not toward honesty, but toward something far more sinister. They were treating me as if I were a mental patient who needed specialized care. It all started that very afternoon when I heard Caleb make a phone call that chilled my blood. "Dr. Ramirez, this is Caleb Vega, Eleanor's son," he said from his room, but loud enough for me to hear from the hallway. "I'm very worried about my mother's mental state. She has developed very severe paranoid behaviors." Dr. Ramirez had been my primary care physician for 15 years, a woman I trusted completely and who knew my medical history better than anyone. "Yes, doctor, severe paranoia," Caleb continued. "She believes we're conspiring against her, that we want to steal her house. She even installed secret cameras to spy on us. We're very worried." The horror of what he was doing paralyzed me. He was building a false medical record of my supposed dementia, using my own discovery of his betrayal as evidence of a mental illness. "When did it start?" Caleb paused, as if carefully considering his answer. "Gradually, over the last few months. But this week it intensified a lot." Yesterday, she directly accused us of wanting to put her in a nursing home. Another pause. Yes, doctor, I understand it's a delicate matter. But frankly, we're scared. We don't know how far her paranoia might go. Scared. They had turned my discovery of their criminal plan into a threat against them. I ran to my room and locked the door. My hands trembled as I opened the camera app on my phone. I needed to record this conversation too, but when I tried to access the audio from their room, I discovered a technical problem. That specific camera's audio wasn't working. A coincidence? I highly doubted it. For the rest of the afternoon, Caleb and Chloe treated me with an exaggerated kindness that was more terrifying than their previous hostility. They spoke to me in soft voices, as if I were a small child or a very sick person. Mom, are you feeling okay? You look a little pale, Chloe would add. Have you been sleeping well? Haven't you had any strange nightmares? Every question was a trap. If I said I felt confused, it confirmed their narrative of mental decline. If I said no, they could interpret my denial as evidence that I was unaware of my own condition. That night, from my room, I heard them planning the next phase of their strategy. Tomorrow I'll call Dr. Ramirez to schedule an urgent appointment, Chloe was saying. We need a professional to officially document the deterioration of her mental state. What if she refuses to go? Caleb asked. She can't refuse. We'll tell her it's a routine checkup for her blood pressure. Once she's in the office, we'll talk to the doctor privately to explain the real situation. Do you think the doctor will believe us? Caleb, we're her family. We've been living with her, observing her behavior day by day. Besides, paranoia in older adults is very common. The doctor has seen cases like this before. They were right about one thing. Paranoia in older adults existed, and doctors saw it frequently. But what they couldn't fabricate were decades of medical history that proved my perfect mental stability. Or maybe they could. The next day, Friday, Caleb announced at breakfast that he had scheduled a doctor's appointment for me. It's just a routine checkup, Mom, he said with that new condescending voice he had developed. To check your blood pressure and make sure everything is okay. I don't need a checkup, I replied. I feel perfectly fine. Of course you feel fine, Chloe intervened. But at your age, it's important to have regular checkups. Besides, you've been a little different lately. More nervous, more distrustful. I'm not nervous or distrustful, I said firmly. I'm alert because I discovered my own family was betraying me. Caleb sighed dramatically, as if dealing with a difficult patient. Mom, please, no one is betraying you. Those are exactly the ideas we need the doctor to review. Ideas. They had reduced my discovery of their criminal conspiracy to ideas that needed medical evaluation. I'm not going to any doctor, I declared. Yes, you are, Caleb replied. And for the first time in days, his voice regained some of its previous hardness. It's for your own good. And if I refuse? Chloe smiled with that fake sweetness she had perfected. Eleanor, don't be difficult. It's just a routine medical appointment. And if I keep refusing? The silence that followed was eloquent. I saw in their eyes that they had a plan for that contingency too. Well, Caleb finally said, we would have to consider other options, for your safety and ours. Other options? An involuntary psychiatric commitment? Probably. I understand, I said simply. That afternoon, while they were supposedly out shopping, I called Dr. Ramirez directly. Doctor, this is Eleanor Vega, I said when I finally got through to her. Eleanor, what a coincidence you called. Your son was just here yesterday, very worried about your mental state. My heart sank. Caleb had already planted the seeds of his false narrative. Doctor, I need to speak with you personally, but not at the appointment Caleb scheduled. In private. There was a pause. Eleanor, do you feel safe in your home? Is your son treating you well? It was a loaded question. Dr. Ramirez had experience with elder abuse, but Caleb had managed to position himself as the concerned son instead of the abuser. Doctor, my son and his wife are trying to steal my house using fraudulent documents. When I discovered them, they decided to make me look mentally incompetent to discredit my accusations. Another pause, longer this time. Eleanor, those are very serious accusations. Do you have any proof of what you're saying? I have complete recordings of their conversations where they confess the entire plan. I see. Her tone had become more professional, more cautious. Would you like to come to my office so we can discuss this calmly? I can see you early tomorrow, before my regular hours. Without Caleb. Without Caleb. It was my chance. Perhaps the only one I would have before their plan went too far. Yes, doctor. Early tomorrow. Perfect. And Eleanor, bring those recordings you mentioned. That night I slept better than I had in a week. I finally had an ally, someone who could hear my side of the story without Caleb and Chloe's filters. But when I woke up on Saturday morning, I discovered they had also been busy during the night. My phone was gone. Good morning, Mom. Caleb greeted me with that fake smile. Looking for something? My phone, I replied, trying to stay calm. Ah, yes. I found it on the floor in the hallway last night. I think you dropped it. It's charging in the kitchen. A lie. I always left my phone on my nightstand. I went to the kitchen, and indeed, there was my phone, plugged into the charger. But when I tried to access the camera app, I discovered it had been uninstalled. Where is the camera app? I asked. Caleb feigned confusion. What app? The app that lets me see the security cameras. Mom, he said in a worried voice, there's no app like that on your phone. Are you sure you didn't dream it? The horror hit me like an avalanche. Not only had they deleted my evidence, but now they were making me doubt my own reality. The cameras are working, I insisted. The technician repaired them on Tuesday. What technician? Chloe asked, appearing from the kitchen as if she had been listening to the whole conversation. Eleanor. No technician has been here. Yes, he was. I called him to repair the cameras. Caleb and Chloe exchanged one of those looks I knew all too well, but this time it was laden with theatrical concern. Mom, Caleb said softly, I think you need to sit down. And in that moment, I understood the full magnitude of what they had done. They hadn't just destroyed my evidence, they had begun to destroy my reality. The war had escalated to a level I hadn't anticipated. It was no longer just about stealing my house. It was about stealing my sanity. The moment I realized they had started manipulating my reality was when I ran to the living room to physically check the security cameras. I knew they were there. I could see them with my own eyes since the technician had installed them. But when I got to the living room, the cameras were gone. There was no trace of them, not even the wires or the marks on the walls where they had been mounted. It was as if they had never existed. Where are the cameras? I shouted, spinning around the room like a woman possessed. Caleb and Chloe followed me, maintaining those expressions of feigned concern that now made me nauseous. Mom, please sit down, Caleb said, trying to guide me to the sofa. You're very upset. I'm not upset. I pulled away from his grip. The cameras were here. They were in that corner, on that wall, up there. I pointed frantically to all the places where I remembered seeing the cameras installed. Eleanor, Chloe intervened with a calm voice. There have never been any cameras here. This house doesn't have a security system. Yes, it does. I hired a technician. I paid $300 for the repair. Caleb approached slowly, as if approaching a wild animal. $300? Where did you get that from? The question hit me like a slap. If there was no technician, if there were no cameras, where was the money I had spent? I ran to my room to check my bank statements. Caleb and Chloe followed me, keeping a safe distance but not letting me out of their sight. With trembling hands, I searched through my financial documents. I had a habit of keeping all receipts for important expenses, especially for house services. There was no receipt from the technician, no charge for $300, no evidence that I had hired anyone to repair cameras. But I remember, I murmured, feeling the floor give way beneath my feet. Mom. Caleb sat on the bed next to me. Sometimes our minds play tricks on us, especially when we're stressed or worried about something. No, I whispered. This isn't real. You're manipulating all of this. How could we manipulate your memories, Mom? Chloe asked gently. How could we make you remember things that never happened? It was a valid question, and that terrified me more than anything else. How could they have altered my memories? Was it possible I was really losing my mind? The recordings, I said desperately. I have recordings of your conversations. What recordings, Mom? On my phone, on the USB drive I hid. I ran to my desk and frantically searched the secret drawer where I had kept the USB drive with the backups. My hands shook as I rummaged through papers, documents, small objects. The USB drive wasn't there. "Are you looking for this?" Chloe held up a small USB drive in her hand. My heart stopped. "Where did you find it?" "On your bedroom floor this morning," she replied with a worried voice. "I thought you might have dropped something important." I snatched the drive from her hands and ran to my computer. I plugged it in with trembling fingers and waited for the files to appear. The drive was empty, completely empty. No, it can't be," I muttered, checking folder after folder. All the recordings were here. Hours of audio and video where they confess everything. "Eleanor," Chloe placed a hand on my shoulder. "This drive is new. It's never been used. Look, it doesn't even have temporary files or usage marks." She was right. The USB drive was completely clean, as if it had just come from the store. "But I copied them here," I insisted, my voice growing more desperate. "I spent hours copying all the recordings." "What recordings, Mom?" Caleb knelt in front of me, taking my hands in his. "Please, explain to me what you think you recorded. Your conversations about Mr. Evans, about the $5,000, about selling the house, about putting me in a nursing home." "Mom," Caleb sighed deeply, "Mr. Evans is a real lawyer. The $5,000 are for real legal procedures, and no one has talked about putting you anywhere." "Yes, you did. I heard you." "When? Where?" "On Tuesday morning. You were in the living room, going through my documents." "On Tuesday morning, I was at job interviews all morning," Caleb said patiently, "and Chloe was at her sister's house, helping with the kids. We weren't at home together until the afternoon." Chloe nodded. "You can call my sister Yolanda if you want. I got to her house at 9 in the morning and didn't leave until 4 in the afternoon." "And the job interviews?" I asked weakly. Caleb took out his phone and showed me a series of text messages. "Here are my exchanges with the companies where I had interviews." "Look at the times, Mom." The messages clearly showed that Caleb had been busy with job interviews all of Tuesday morning. The times coincided exactly with when I remembered hearing them conspiring in the living room. But I saw you." My voice was barely a whisper. "Mom, I think you had a very vivid dream," Caleb said gently. "Sometimes dreams can seem so real that we mistake them for true memories." "It wasn't a dream. I was wide awake." "Are you sure?" Chloe sat on the other side of the bed. "You've been taking long naps lately. It's possible you were dreaming and didn't realize it." It was possible. For the past few weeks, I had been sleeping poorly at night due to stress, which led me to nap during the day. Was it possible I had confused a dream with reality? "But the documents," I said, clinging to the last shred of my certainty. "You wanted me to sign fraudulent documents." Caleb exchanged a look with Chloe before answering. "Mom, we showed you completely normal legal documents. To update your will and ensure that if you ever need medical help, we can make decisions on your behalf." "Can I see them again?" "Of course." Caleb left the room and returned with the same documents he had tried to make me sign days before. But when I reviewed them more calmly, without the paranoia I had felt then, they seemed different. They were standard legal documents. A medical power of attorney, a will update, basic authorizations for a family member to handle financial affairs in case of medical incapacity. Nothing sinister. Nothing fraudulent. "See?" Chloe said softly. "They're completely normal documents that any responsible family should have. But you pressured me to sign them without reading." "We suggested it wasn't necessary to read all the legal jargon because they are standard forms," Caleb corrected. "But we never stopped you from reading them. In fact, when you said you wanted to think about it, we respected your decision." It was true. They had respected my decision not to sign immediately. "And the economic blackmail?" I asked desperately. "What economic blackmail? You said you were going to cancel my health insurance, that you wouldn't let me use the car." Caleb frowned with genuine confusion. "Mom, we told you we were going through financial difficulties and that we might have to make some temporary adjustments to the family expenses. But we never threatened to leave you without medical care." "And Mr. Evans, the corrupt lawyer?" "Mr. Evans isn't corrupt, Mom. He's the lawyer, Doctor." Hernandez recommended to help us with all these procedures. You can call him if you want. Every explanation made sense. Every piece of evidence I thought I had crumbled before rational, verifiable explanations. Was it possible I was really losing my mind? Was it possible my mind had created an elaborate conspiracy where none existed? Mom. Caleb took my hands and looked me straight in the eye. We're worried about you. These episodes of paranoia, these false memories, this distrust of us, they're not normal. Please, Chloe added, let us take you to Dr. Ramirez, just to make sure you're okay. For the first time in days, their concern seemed genuine. Their voices had lost that theatrical quality I had been detecting. They seemed genuinely scared for my well-being. And if the doctor says I'm fine? I asked in a small voice. Then we'll celebrate and apologize for ever doubting you, Caleb responded immediately. But Mom, we need to be sure. We love you too much to ignore these signs. We love you. I hadn't heard those words from their lips in days, and they sounded sincere. Was it possible that it had all been a product of my imagination? Was it possible that stress, loneliness, age had conspired to create fantasies so vivid that I had mistaken them for reality? Okay, I finally whispered. I'll go to Dr. Ramirez. Caleb and Chloe sighed with visible relief. Thank you, Mom, Caleb said, hugging me tightly. Everything's going to be okay, I promise. As he hugged me, a very small part of my brain was still screaming that something wasn't right, that this was all too convenient, too perfect. But that voice was getting weaker, more distant. Maybe I really was losing my mind. On Monday morning, as I was getting ready to go to Dr. Ramirez's office, something strange happened. Caleb received a phone call that changed everything. Mr. Evans? So early. Caleb seemed surprised by the call. No, we haven't been able to. Yes, I understand the deadline is today, but… Mr. Evans. The name that had been haunting me for days. The name Caleb had insisted belonged to a legitimate lawyer. Look, the situation got more complicated than expected, Caleb continued, moving toward the kitchen but not lowering his voice too much. The old woman is more alert than we thought. The old woman. He referred to me as the old woman. Yes, I know you already paid part of the advance, but we'll have to postpone it. Caleb sounded frustrated. You can't return at least half of the $3,000? $3,000. Not $5,000 as I had imagined, but still a considerable amount for supposedly legitimate legal services. Okay, give me one more week. Caleb lowered his voice even more. I promise you that by Friday I'll have the documents signed. Signed documents. The same legitimate documents they had shown me? No, Chloe handles these situations better. She knows exactly which buttons to push. Yes, of course she can forge the signature if necessary, but we'd prefer she sign voluntarily. Forge the signature. Those 3 words hit me like a lightning bolt. I hadn't imagined anything. I wasn't crazy. It had all been real from the beginning. Caleb finished the call and returned to the living room, where I was pretending to watch television. Everything okay, sweetie? I asked with the most innocent voice I could muster. Yeah, Mom, just work stuff, he replied distractedly. Work stuff. His job was to rob me. During the drive to the doctor's office, I maintained absolute silence as my mind worked at full speed. I had regained my sanity, along with the certainty that Caleb and Chloe had orchestrated a very elaborate, psychological campaign to make me doubt my own reality. They had physically removed the cameras during the night. They had erased the recordings from my phone and replaced the USB drive. They had fabricated false alibis for Tuesday morning. They had completely rewritten the narrative to make me look like a paranoid old woman. But they had made a mistake. Caleb had spoken too loudly during the call with Mr. Evans. Dr. Ramirez, I said as soon as we were alone in her office, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Of course, Eleanor. Caleb told me about his concerns. Caleb is stealing from me, I interrupted. He and his wife have been planning to forge my signature to transfer my house to their names. Dr. Ramirez leaned back in her chair, studying my face carefully. Eleanor, those are very serious accusations. Do you have any proof of what you're saying? They destroyed all my proof. They removed the security cameras, erased the recordings, manipulated my memory into making me believe I had imagined everything. And how do you know you didn't imagine it? Because an hour ago, I heard Caleb talking on the phone with Mr. Evans, the lawyer they're going to hire for the forgery. He mentioned a $3,000 advance and said that Chloe could forge my signature if necessary. Dr. Ramirez took notes as I spoke. Can you repeat exactly what you heard? I recounted the conversation word for word. I saw her expression grow more serious with each detail. Eleanor, these are accusations of fraud and elder abuse. If they're true, we must involve the authorities. But you believe me? I've known your medical history for 15 years. You haven't shown any signs of cognitive decline or dementia. Your last neurological exam was completely normal. But Caleb told you I was developing paranoia. Caleb called me worried. That's true, but after hearing your version, I think there's another explanation for your supposed paranoia. What? That it wasn't paranoia at all. It was correct intuition about a real threat. For the first time in days, I felt validated. I wasn't crazy. I hadn't imagined anything. My instinct had been right from the start. What do you suggest we do? I asked. First, we're going to do a full cognitive exam right here to officially document that you are in full mental faculty. Second, I'm going to give you the contact of a private investigator who specializes in family abuse cases. Third, we're going to talk to a lawyer specializing in elder protection. And Caleb? Caleb can't know anything about this until we have all the legal protections in place. For the next 2 hours, Dr. Ramirez put me through a complete battery of cognitive tests. Short and long-term memory, executive function, spatial and temporal orientation, abstract reasoning ability. I passed all the tests with perfect scores. Eleanor, she finally said, you have the sharpest mind I've seen in a woman your age. There are absolutely no signs of cognitive decline. Can you document that officially? I'm already doing it. This medical report clearly states that you are in full mental faculty and perfectly capable of making legal and financial decisions. We returned home at noon. Caleb and Chloe greeted me with poorly concealed anxiety. How did it go, Mom? Caleb asked. What did the doctor say? She said I'm perfectly fine. I replied naturally, that there's no cognitive problem and that it was probably all accumulated stress. I saw their faces light up with relief and something I recognized as disappointment. Stress? Chloe asked. Stress over what? Over living alone, worrying about the future, not having clarity on my legal documents. I improvised. The doctor suggested that maybe it would be a good idea to finally organize those papers you wanted me to sign. Caleb and Chloe exchanged a look of barely contained triumph. That's great news, Mom, Caleb said. So you're ready to sign those documents? I think so, I lied. But the doctor suggested it would be good to review them calmly first, to fully understand what I'm signing. Of course, Chloe replied quickly. You have all the time you need. Perfect. Could we review them together tomorrow afternoon? I want to be completely sure before I sign. Absolutely. Caleb smiled with that false warmth I knew so well. But now I also had my own secret agenda. That afternoon, while they thought I was taking a nap, I was on the phone for hours. First with the private investigator Dr. Ramirez had recommended. Then with the lawyer specializing in elder protection. Mrs. Vega, the detective told me. We need direct evidence of their fraudulent plan. Would you be willing to wear a hidden microphone to record their conversations? Is it legal? Perfectly legal to record conversations in your own home when there is reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. Then yes. Perfect. First thing tomorrow morning, we'll install the equipment. We'll also place hidden cameras in your living room and dining room. The lawyer was just as direct. With the recordings you obtain and Dr. Ramirez's medical report, we'll have a solid case not only to prevent the fraud but to criminally prosecute your son and daughter-in-law. Criminal prosecution. Conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted document forgery, financial abuse of an elder. We're talking about several years in prison. Several years in prison for Caleb, my son. Is there any alternative? I asked. We can offer a deal where they completely abandon their criminal plans in exchange for not pressing charges, but we would need solid evidence first to have negotiating power. That night, while Caleb and Chloe celebrated in whispers what they believed would be their imminent victory, I carefully planned the trap I was going to set for them. The next day, during our review of the documents, I would have high-quality recordings of everything they said. I would finally have the irrefutable evidence I needed. The hunter had officially become the prey, but they didn't know it yet. Tuesday morning arrived with a crystal clarity that seemed to foreshadow the end of this nightmare. At 7 in the morning, while Caleb and Chloe were still asleep, the private investigator and a specialized technician arrived discreetly at my house. In less than an hour, they had installed high-quality microphones on my clothes and microscopic cameras in strategic places in the living and dining rooms, all completely invisible, but capable of capturing every word and gesture with perfect clarity. Remember, Mrs. Vega, the detective instructed me before leaving. Try to get them to specifically confess their forgery plans. We need them to clearly say they are going to forge your signature or that they are going to use fraudulent documents. What if they suspect something? Act exactly as you have been. Be cooperative, but cautious. They expect you to be that way after everything that has happened. At 2 in the afternoon, just as we had agreed, we sat down in the dining room to review the documents. Caleb had spread all the papers on the table, and Chloe had a pen ready next to each page that required a signature. All right, Mom. Caleb began with that exaggerated patience he had perfected. We're going to review each document so you understand exactly what you're signing. Perfect, I replied, discreetly adjusting my blouse to ensure the microphone captured everything clearly. Caleb started with the first document, explaining it line by line. It was indeed a legal power of attorney, but worded in a way that would give them almost absolute control over my finances and properties. This document, he explained, would allow us to manage your affairs if you were ever unable to do it yourself. And what exactly does unable to do it myself mean? I asked. Chloe intervened. Well, if you had an illness, or if your memory started to fail, or if you simply decided it was too much work to handle everything alone, or if you decided my memory was failing? I asked with apparent innocence. Caleb tensed slightly. Why would you say that, Mom? Well, after what happened last week, when you thought I was developing paranoia, that was different, he replied quickly. You were showing real symptoms of confusion. Real symptoms or convenient symptoms? The silence that followed was tense. I saw Caleb and Chloe exchange warning glances. I don't understand what you mean, Chloe finally said. I mean, it's very convenient that just when I discover you want me to sign documents I don't fully understand, I suddenly develop memory problems that justify you taking control of my life. Caleb leaned forward, his patience beginning to crack. Mom, no one is trying to control your life. Aren't you? Then explain to me why this document gives you the power to sell my house without my consent. It doesn't say that, Chloe protested. Yes, it does, I insisted, pointing to a specific clause. Right here it says, you can dispose of real property as you deem convenient for the well-being of the grantor. Caleb sighed in frustration. Mom, that clause is for emergency situations. If you needed expensive medical care, for example, or if you decided I needed care in a nursing home. Why do you keep talking about nursing homes? Chloe's voice had acquired a cutting edge. Because I heard you when you said that with the $150,000 from the sale of the house, you could find something affordable but comfortable for my final years. This time, the silence was absolute. Caleb had gone pale, and Chloe seemed to be rapidly calculating her options. I don't know what you're talking about, Chloe finally mumbled. Of course you know. Just like you know that Mr. Evans isn't a legitimate lawyer, but someone who specializes in forging documents. Caleb shot up from the table. Where did you hear that name? In your phone conversation yesterday morning. When you told him that the old woman was more alert than expected and that Chloe could forge my signature if necessary. The mask finally fell completely. Caleb looked at me with a mix of panic and fury that reminded me of the child who used to throw tantrums when he was caught lying. You've been spying on us, he accused. I've been protecting myself, I corrected, from my own son, who decided that stealing from me was easier than working honestly. Chloe approached me with slow, deliberate movements. Eleanor, it doesn't matter what you think you heard. You have no proof of anything. No proof. I stood up from the table, feeling a strange calm wash over me. "Are you sure about that?" "Completely sure," she responded with arrogance, "because we made sure you had no proof." "Like when you removed the security cameras during the night?" "Exactly." Caleb had regained some of his composure, believing he had won. "Like when you erased all my fantasy recordings and replaced my USB drive? And like when you fabricated false alibis for Tuesday morning?" "That too," Chloe admitted with a cruel smile. Caleb never had job interviews that day. He was here with me, planning exactly how to handle a meddling old woman. "And the text messages with the companies?" "Fake," Caleb laughed. "It's incredibly easy to fake text conversations when you know how." "So you admit it was all a setup to make me believe I was crazy?" "We admit you're a stupid old woman who almost ruined a perfect plan," Chloe burst out. "But it doesn't matter, because in the end, you're going to sign these documents anyway." "And if I refuse?" Caleb smiled with pure malice. "Then we'll have to resort to Plan B. A fake medical certificate declaring you mentally unfit to manage your affairs. We have contacts who can arrange that for the right price." "And after that?" "After that," Chloe leaned in until she was inches from my face, "we put you in the cheapest place we can find and sell this house to finance our future." "Our future without you," Caleb added with absolute coldness. "Because frankly, Mom, you've already served your purpose in our lives." There it was, the full, clear, irrefutable confession of their entire criminal plan. "I understand," I said simply. "And you feel absolutely no remorse for betraying the woman who cared for you and loved you?" "Remorse?" Caleb laughed bitterly. "For a woman who has had us living like parasites off her crumbs? This house is worth a fortune, and we live like beggars waiting for your monthly handouts." "Handouts of $300 a month," Chloe added with disdain, "when we could be living like millionaires." "Millionaires," I repeated, "with my money." "With the money that's rightfully ours," Caleb corrected. "I'm your only son. That house should be mine by right. By right of having endured 35 years of your emotional manipulation, your maternal blackmail, your constant need for control." "I see," I said, walking slowly to the window. "So all of this is my fault." "Completely your fault," Chloe confirmed. "If you had been a less selfish mother, if you had given us access to your money voluntarily, none of this would have been necessary." I stood in silence for a long moment, looking out at the garden where I had taught Caleb to ride a bike, where we had played when he was a child, where I had dreamed we would have grandchildren running around one day. "Well," I said finally, turning to face them, "I suppose now I fully understand who you really are. And now that you understand," Caleb held out the pen to me, "you can sign these documents and make all of this easier for everyone." I took the pen between my fingers and held it over the first page. "You know what, Caleb?" I said with a smile he couldn't interpret. "You're right about one thing." "About what?" "That I'm a stupid old woman." And then I dropped the pen on the table. "But I'm not stupid enough to sign my own death sentence." The look of confusion on Caleb and Chloe's faces lasted exactly 3 seconds before the front door opened and in walked the private investigator, 2 uniformed police officers, and my lawyer specializing in elder protection. "Good afternoon," the detective said in a professional, calm voice. "I'm Detective Joaquin Morales. Caleb Vega and Chloe Herrera, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted document forgery, and financial abuse of an elder." The shock on their faces was absolute. Caleb froze like a statue while Chloe began to back away toward the kitchen as if she could somehow escape what was happening. "This is impossible," Caleb muttered, looking at me as if I were a ghost. "You have no proof of anything." I discreetly pulled out the small microphone that had been hidden under my blouse throughout the conversation and placed it on the table next to the fraudulent documents. "Actually, I have high-quality recordings of the entire conversation we just had. Recordings where you explicitly confess your plan to forge my signature, steal my house, have me committed against my will in a nursing home, and obtain false medical certificates to declare me mentally incompetent." The lawyer approached the table and began collecting the documents as he explained. "In addition to the audio recordings, we have high-definition video of this entire conversation thanks to the cameras we installed this morning while you were asleep. We also have a complete medical report from Dr. Ramirez that categorically states that Mrs. Vega is in full mental faculty and is completely capable of making legal decisions. Chloe finally found her voice, though it sounded broken and desperate. This is an illegal trap. You recorded us without our consent. False, the detective replied with professional patience. Mrs. Vega has the absolute right to record conversations on her own property when there is reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. Furthermore, you voluntarily confessed all the details of your conspiracy without any coercion. Caleb finally reacted, but not with remorse, but with blind fury. This is all your fault, you damned old woman. If you had been a normal mother, if you had treated us like real family instead of constantly controlling us, none of this would have been necessary. Caleb, I said with a calmness that surprised even myself, for 35 years I worked double shifts as a nurse to give you everything you needed. I gave up on finding love again to focus completely on your education and well-being. I paid for your entire college education, supported you financially every time you lost a job, opened the doors of my home to you when you had nowhere to live. One of the police officers began to read Caleb his rights as he put him in handcuffs, but I continued speaking because I needed to say these words that had been growing in my chest for weeks. All I asked for in return was respect, honesty, and something resembling the filial love that any mother deserves. Instead, you chose to see me as an obstacle to your economic prosperity, as an inconvenient old woman you could manipulate, steal from, and discard when I was no longer useful. Chloe, as the second officer also handcuffed her, screamed in desperation. We took care of you. We lived with you. We kept you company. We helped you with everything. You took care of me the way vultures take care of a dying animal, I retorted without raising my voice, patiently waiting for the right moment to devour the remains. The only difference is that you didn't wait for me to die naturally. You decided to speed up the process through fraud and psychological manipulation. As they were being led to the door, the detective explained to me, Mrs. Vega, with the evidence we've collected, the district attorney is prepared to file charges for criminal conspiracy, attempted fraud, document forgery, financial abuse of an elder, and psychological manipulation with intent to mentally incapacitate the victim. We're talking about sentences that could range from 5 to 15 years in prison for each of them. And if I wanted to offer them some kind of deal? I asked, feeling that last vestige of maternal love that never seemed to die completely. My lawyer intervened. We could consider a deal where they relinquish any future claim on your property or inheritance, maintain a minimum distance of 500 yards from you permanently, and complete family abuse rehabilitation programs. In exchange, you could consider not insisting on the maximum criminal sentence. Caleb, from the front door with his hands cuffed behind his back, looked at me with eyes that mixed hatred and desperate pleading. Mom, please, think about it. I'm your only son. Are you really going to destroy your own family over a house? The question that had been tormenting me for days finally had a clear and definitive answer. Caleb, you destroyed this family the moment you decided my life was worth only the dollars you could get for my house. I'm simply protecting what's left of my dignity and my right to live in peace for the years I have left. After Caleb and Chloe were taken away, I was left alone in my house for the first time in months. The silence was profound, but not frightening. It was the silence of peace regained, of danger eliminated, of betrayal finally exposed and punished. I sat on my favorite sofa, the same one where I had so often comforted Caleb when he was a child, where I had read him stories, where we had watched movies together during his adolescence. Now it was just my sofa again, in my house, in my life that finally belonged completely to me. 3 months later, Caleb and Chloe accepted the deal we offered them. They gave up all rights to my property, agreed to stay away from me permanently, and completed rehabilitation programs. In return, they served only 18 months in prison instead of the 10 years they could have faced. Some people asked me if I didn't regret being so harsh with my only son. My answer was always the same. I didn't regret adopting him when he was a helpless child who needed love. I only regretted not understanding sooner that maternal kindness should never be practiced at the cost of self-destruction. Now I live peacefully in my house, surrounded by neighbors who have become my new chosen family. I've learned that true family is not defined by blood or legal documents, but by mutual respect, honesty, and genuine love. And when I look back at everything I went through, I realized that the woman who emerged from that experience is stronger, wiser, and infinitely freer than the one who went into it. Sometimes, to save yourself, you have to be willing to lose those you thought you loved the most.